growing up, I did have close relationships with most of the artists in my mother's gallery. I'd go to the openings. I often went to their houses and played with their kids. It was wonderful. Their houses were so fascinating, quite different than ours. Yes, they had bedrooms and bathrooms and kitchens and so forth, but their houses were filled with skulls and bowls and things and all sorts of artifacts that gave them inspiration. And it's interesting, artists always have an amazing sense of style. Now, once I started collecting the prints in multiples, I didn't make a big effort to meet the artists, these big national artists, but over time, I have been lucky to meet a number of them. I guess one of the reasons I was concerned about meeting them is when you're lucky enough to have art in your presence, like I hope all of you do, it becomes part of your life, part of your family. You wake up, you see a piece of art on a wall as you go to the bathroom and get ready for work that day, or you go in the kitchen or your living room or whatever. And it becomes like a friend. So I was always worried that the art that means so much to me, if I suddenly met an artist and they just were a jerk, every time I'd see that work, I'd be so conflicted thinking, gosh darn it, why do you have to be such a jerk when I love your work? Now, luckily for me, over the years I have developed some very special relationships with a number of artists. And what I will tell you is to a T, every one of them has been down to earth, wonderful human beings. I'm talking about the late Ellsworth Kelly, Frank Stella, Jeff Koons, Leonardo Youngwins, Leonardo Drew, Lorna Simpson, Kara Walker, so many of them. They've all been wonderful, wonderful human beings. So my fear has never been realized. And while I certainly don't fawn over artists and don't make, you only have so much time in your life to really have close relationships, they're like all of us. They get up every day. They put their pants on one leg at a time. They've got their issues with, kids, relatives, wives, husbands, everything. But they are gifted in certain ways. And we're lucky that they have those gifts and that they've worked hard over the years to refine those gifts and continue pushing their envelope to evolve their art and continue to challenge, inspire, and bring joy to our lives. Over the years, I have spent a fair amount of time with artists, and there are several stories that I think are interesting. Frank Stella. As I mentioned, one of the first prints I bought was Frank Stella's. And over the years, I kept buying more of Frank Stella's work and loved every single thing he has ever done. So I worked with probably the foremost art writer in the country, Rick Axon, on a catalog raisonné of Ellsworth Kelly. We've published now 12 books, half dozen catalog raisonnés, meaning a book that has all of their work, in this case prints in multiples. And after we finished the 3-year gargantuan catalog raisonné for Ellsworth Kelly that was a joy to do, I said, what do you want to do next? He'd already written a catalog raisonné of Frank's work years before. And he said, I'd love to do an updated Frank Stella catalog raisonné. I said, you got it, let's do it. Next thing I know, I meet Frank Stella in New York. And it's interesting. These big artists, they meet collectors all the time. And even though I buy a lot of prints, I'm a peanut collector compared to the folks that buy the contemporary art for millions and millions of dollars per painting and so forth. So he had sort of a very polite but a little skeptical, and but we had a nice conversation and toured his studio in New York. Well, several months later, I was invited up to Ancrum, New York, where he has his big studio, and Rick Axon, we go on up there, and it was a big warehouse, big industrial warehouse with a big crane and so forth, and there was stuff all over the place. I wished my late father then, who had a degree in metallurgy from MIT, had been with us, because he would have loved all the metal all over the place. And we're walking around, and Frank's being very open and talking about work and so forth. And gosh, I remember going and seeing one big giant work that's on a wall, about 12 feet tall, and I said, my gosh, wow, look at that. He said, well, that was done for a Paris museum show, and they were supposed to buy it, but they didn't, and it came back. I said, well, how do you move it? He said, what do you mean, you roll it up? I said, what do you mean roll it up? He said, come on over here. And I go on over to it, and it was on sort of a fabric-y thing, and he says, here. And I'm feeling the artwork. I'm playing with his big, amazing 15-foot by 18-foot artistic creation. I remember a week or two later when I went to see the Whitney retrospective of Frank Stella, and I was looking at all those amazing works on the wall, I thought, well, maybe I should just go on up and touch, but I knew better and I didn't. Okay. In the meantime, had spent more time with Frank, and we had various openings around the country and book signings and so forth. And we then had an exhibition of his work at Phillips Andover Academy, where he'd gone to high school. And I was there with Ken Tyler, the master printer that did virtually all of his work. And to be in a room walking through 130 prints with Ken Tyler, the master printer, and Frank Stella, the artist, and my being a little bird behind them, listening to them talk. Hey, Frank, remember that? It took us 3 months. I had 8 people working on that, and it kept, not coming to fruition and so forth. A really, really special moment. Very special. But then, it was interesting. Rick Axum came up to me after that exhibition that night, and Frank's wife Harriet was there and his sister, and he said to me, Jordan, Frank just came up to me and said, after the last 2-3 years working with you and going around the country for these openings, he said to me, you know what? That Jordan Schnitzer's the real thing. I thought to myself, that's the ultimate compliment, okay? And actually, I called Rick Axum about 3 weeks ago, and I said, Rick, you know what today is? He said, what? I said, it's Frank Stella's 85th birthday. Let's call him. So we did a conference call, and we called Frank and wished him happy birthday. He's probably heard people sing happy birthday in better voices than ours, but we had a fun conversation. Amazing artist, and I'm lucky to have his work in my collection and to continue to exhibit it around the country. I was invited to Washington, D.C. to celebrate the National Gallery's exhibition of work from Gemini GEL, the fabulous publishing house established in the early 60s in Los Angeles by the late Stanley Grinstein and Sid Felsen, giants in our industry. And they had donated one of everything that Gemini had done, at that point about 1,900 things, to the National Gallery. And very special to be with the artists that came, and Joni Weil, Sid Felsen, Grinstein daughters, very special time. Well, we were invited to a dinner at the State Department, and as we're going through security, I see a gentleman, and I went over and said, you're Jeff Koons, aren't you? And he said, yes. I said, well, my name's Jordan Schnitzer. I love your work. I've had your work in probably 30 museums. We do a great job getting the work around the country. We do a lousy job letting you artists know where your work is from our collection. He laughed. And I said, I love your prints and multiples. He said, I think I'd like to make some more. Where do you think I should go? And I said, well, seeing as you're in New York, I work with all the publishers across the country, but Two Palms Press is one of the most creative publishers working today. And David and Evelyn Lazary are delightful, the owners. Why don't you give him a call? He did, and he's now produced 4 editions with them, which I bought. And it's wonderful to have been a facilitator to one of the leading artists in the world and one of the leading publishers of the world. And again, that magic of their working together has created some phenomenal Jeff Koons art. David Hockney. David Hockney's work was one of the artists I picked that first day when I began to buy some prints, and I've loved every single thing he's done. And while he's technically British, we'll sort of claim him as being an American, since he has spent most of his life living in Los Angeles. Well, I was offered an opportunity by a wonderful art advisor, Doug Roberts, who's a close friend of his, to get to know him. And then the Getty Museum called up and asked if we would help fund Hockney's 80th birthday celebration at the Getty, which we did. So I was lucky to spend a couple days having dinner with Jim Kuno, the head of the Getty Trust, and David Hockney, and was able to spend a half a day in David Hockney's studio. And my gosh, a number of the prints I have of his swimming pool, of tables and chairs. When you go to his house and studio, it is unbelievable. It's like walking into the art that I've been collecting for so many years. And to be there with him while he was smoking a cigarette, flip-flopping in his mouth, and showing us the iPad that he'd actually work on and how he'd create this phenomenal art that he then sent down to be digitized. A very special, special day. Alison Saar, another amazing artist. The first time I saw her work, I just, Tandem Press, I just wanted it. And Tandem Press, which is a fabulous publisher at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Paula Pachenko has just run that organization for years. Bought her work. Then I got a call from Kimberly Davis from LA Louvre Gallery in LA, which represents Alison Saar, and started buying, in addition to prints, a number of sculptures. And 2 years ago, Alison was awarded by the Southern Graphics Print Council Artist of the Year. And so we arranged to have an exhibition of her start at the University of North Texas in Denton, near Dallas, where the conference is being held. And that exhibition has toured a number of museums, and I've continued buying her work. Her mother, Betty, just had an exhibition at the Modern Museum of Art, and you can see where Alison got her inspiration, just as Alison's daughter is an artist too. She's a brilliant, brilliant artist, and helping us deal with issues that have continued to divide this country. How we treat each other, racism, the intolerance. It's through art that, for me and many of us, we can learn better understanding about the importance of reaching out to each other and learning how we're all blessed human beings and need to not just accept, but embrace our differences and celebrate the diversity in this country and the richness that comes from having friendships of people that not always are like us. So to Alison Saar, we're honored to have your work in our collection, and we look forward to many years of the continued collaboration. Mel Bachner is another artist that I saw his work years ago and just had to have it. And since then, I guess I've had to have about another 200 of his things. And we did a book about Mel Bachner, and we've had a national show of his work. And here's an artist that early on was a minimalist and was pushing that envelope, but the last 20 years, he's been working with words. And what more important concept than to help us understand how we talk to each other, what words mean, how we end up stereotyping ourselves and others. So not only graphically is he a master colorist, and the techniques he uses to, especially with Two Palms Press, who publishes his work, they are just a tour de force how they technologically are made. But the energy and the motion, when you see his work, you just are grabbed by it. And it makes you think. And for that, Mel, on behalf of myself and the millions of people that have been inspired by your work, frustrated by it, challenged by it, pleased by it, you've made us think. Years ago, I was approached by the Museum of the Northwest in Spokane about doing a show of Liechtenstein work. And I said, you bet. And then the director asked if we might want to publish a small brochure. And I said, in fact, you know what? Why don't we do a little book? So the first book I did was a Liechtenstein book. And it was so much fun doing it that since that time we've published 12 books, 5 catalog raisonnés, and 7 books about artists. Probably the one that was fascinating to do was John Baldessari, who recently passed away. Probably the most important conceptual artist in the world, although he hated being called a conceptual artist. But he, probably more than any other artist of our time, helped other artists burst open their creativity by his taking these images and manipulating them in ways that none of us would ever think about when we'd see a picture of someone or some object. So he was able to open himself up and do things that had just never been done. And therefore, a lot of younger artists that followed him realized they too could open up their hearts, their minds, and let their creative genius soar and not question whether they should be held back by some established norm. We did a catalog raisonné of John Baldessari and another book about him. We had a national tour of his work, spent lots of time with him. A towering giant, 6'7". I've never seen anyone as patient, the teacher that he was for 50 years, answering what I thought were inane questions by reporters that weren't the art reporters, but he was a wonderful, wonderful man and inspiring to be around. Very quiet. When he'd smile, you'd break into a grin yourself, but a towering giant, both physically and the art legacy that he left that will go on in perpetuity. Thank you, John. So, as I said, the times I've spent with the artists has been an absolute treat. Polly Athelbaum, amazing artist. We had a show of her work at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art at Washington State University. Wonderful to spend 3 days with her. And that brings up the issue of all the museums I've done. So in addition to being passionate buying the art, being more passionate about sharing the art, another third giant passion of mine is helping in the best way I can, being like Johnny Appleseed of museums, of helping young people realize that those museums in their communities, on their campuses, are not for somebody else. They're for them. They're not there for some elitist few. Now that may have been true hundreds of years ago when only in Europe, only the royal families and feudal lords had art. But today, art is very democratic. So to help further and break down those walls, I've worked at 3 universities so far. We're working on 1 or 2 more, and help fund university museums. And the idea is if we can get students on campus to realize going to that museum on their campus is a fun thing to do, then maybe, just maybe, when they go back to their communities across the country, they'll go to those art museums. Or when they travel, they'll say, hey, let's stop in at the San Francisco Modern Museum or the Whitney or Tampa, Jacksonville, St. Louis, Springfield, Missouri, Laramie, Wyoming, okay, Bellevue, Washington, the Whatcom Museum, or rather Bellingham. So I've really enjoyed that, working with university administrators, presidents, head of the art departments, and I guess if there were a legacy that I might have, it's helping to create a number of these university art museums, and then we're working on programs to have them start working together on curatorial programs and sharing exhibitions and speakers, and again, I guess in essence, taking art to the masses. Andy Warhol, who was a great believer in the democratization of art, I can be very proud of what I've done. Not only getting his art out all over the country, but helping get these museums on campuses built so that every student can have equal opportunity to enjoy going to a museum on their campus. When I've been asked, where does this all end with your art program? And I think of that amazing Nike ad that showed a runner running on a road that sort of went up and up and up into the horizon. And I guess I see that with our program. There'll never be enough time or money to buy all the art I want to buy. There'll never be enough museums for us to get to with our exhibition program. And there'll never be enough lives to touch by getting them in and letting these artists have their magical effect on each individual. So that'll never stop. State-wise, I have put things in place that the collection will continue to grow, be available to museums across the country and around the world if they so want. And in terms of funding more university museums, I hope to be able to do a few more of those while I'm able to, and help spread that word that museums are a pretty fun place to go. So it's a wonderful passion to have. I hope my children enjoy the art I've given them and continue to build up passion about art or whatever passions they want to have. But I'll never forget the influence of my mother opening that art door, and I hope I've opened that art door for many, many, many others too.